Remember Super Mario Brothers? No, not that version. Yes, the other one. We are talking about the 1993 Super Mario Brothers movie that was so infamous for many different reasons. For one, being the first video game movie ever to be made, and also the fact that it was so infamous for bombing hard and being panned by everyone. The film was so odd in its nature, featuring weird Goombas, Dino Hatton, a humanoid Koopa, and of course, fungus everywhere.
Stupid.
Most of the criticism for the film was the fact that the film was nothing like the video game. It was some kind of weird version of them. But what if I was to tell you that we almost got a very different Super Mario Brothers movie? A movie that was much more faithful to the games, featuring tons of classic characters like Koopa, Toad, Bombs, and even Piranha Plant. Also featuring a more accurate Mushroom Kingdom and plenty other video game references faithful to the video game. So this is overall the story of the lost film that we never got to see. How it came to be, what it was, and how it ended up with the final film that we got, for better or for worse. This is the story of the cancelled 1990s Super Mario Bros. Movie. Let's jump into this green pipe and let's get into this. To fully understand the story of this lost film, we must go back to the very beginning. Nintendo was one of the biggest video game companies that arguably saved the video game industry in the mid-80s, with their home console, the NES. With one of their first games, Super Mario Bros., being a massive hit, eventually becoming very popular with other games and franchises and soon appearing everywhere from trading cards, merchandise deals, and even animation. And soon a big budget film seemed like the next obstacle to conquer for the massive franchise. At the time, Nintendo was in discussions with Dick for a live action adaptation for their Super Mario Bros. Super Show, which sadly never panned out. And shortly after in relation, the film The Wizard, Nintendo licensed some of their properties to include inside the film, including Super Mario Bros. 3, and of course that famous Power Glove.
I love the Power Glove. It's so bad.
The film was basically a giant glorified Nintendo commercial. Still though, it was mildly successful, which gave Nintendo more confidence in working with Hollywood studios for their properties. And soon with the success of Mario growing as a franchise, many studios and producers began pitching for the rights to make a live-action film for the big screen. Many studios offered huge amounts of money for the rights, but usually Nintendo wasn't actually interested in that thing, as money did not matter to them. Mario was already an extremely successful franchise. Even the actor Dustin Hoffman tried for a pitch for a Super Mario Bros. Movie, but was ultimately unsuccessful. Nintendo usually wasn't really interested in the money side of things. They were more interested in the approach to the property and also having some control of their movie adaptation and rights. Essentially, in Nintendo's eyes, the whole movie was an experiment, and eventually, to see if it could be done, soon to the shock of many, Nintendo actually went with independent producers Roland Joffe and Jake Eberts of the recently created independent studio Light Motive. The producers did not have much experience in directing family-friendly films, but did have a lot of experience in serious dramas, even with Roland directing The Killing Fields, a serious drama about the Cambodian genocide. Essentially, they had pitched Nintendo what they wanted to do with a Mario story with an edge, and it wasn't really a type of lovey-dovey, overall fantasy type of story. And to the surprise of many, Nintendo, despite the games that it made in the past were mostly fantasy and family-friendly, actually wanted that type of tone as well. Also, the idea pitched by the duo of doing a sort of prequel to the games, setting up the world, intrigued Nintendo as well, since to be honest, the first Mario game was kind of light on story. So eventually, Light Motive scored the deal and signed a $2 million contract for the rights of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Now, for how they would actually develop the film, which would be an entirely different story later on. For potential movement and writers for the film, it all started out with Dustin Hoffman, who, even though he was unsuccessful already in his pitch, still decided to meet with the producers to get him possibly starring as Luigi, and eventually Danny DeVito as Mario, and his choice for director was the Rain Man director for the film. Nintendo wasn't really keen on the idea, but this overall connection led to Rain Man writer Barry Morrow, who after playing a Mario for a day, decided to write the first draft for the film. This draft of the film is sadly not available online, due to the fact it was actually never finished. But that being said, it was nicknamed Drain Man by people who actually read it. This was because it bore a lot of similarity to the film Rain Man, with it being a journey about two brothers on a search for something. described as a serious drama with dark elements. This draft was viewed as being too serious by the producers, and soon turned to screenwriters Jim Genuine and Tom S. Parker for a more lighthearted and traditional approach to the story. Screenwriters Jim Genuine and Tom S. Parker were friends who met at an advertising agency with dreams of becoming Hollywood writers. They created a script called Terror Vision that was very well liked by many studios, and for some Hollywood shenanigans, they apparently got representation on a Thursday, the script was sold on a Friday, and the duo quit their jobs on the weekend. And wow, that is just a Hollywood dream, baby. Eventually, though, the script was turned into the film Stay Tuned, which actually overall in quality isn't really half bad, but the fact the script got sold quickly got the push needed for the duo to meet with the producers for the Super Mario Bros. Movie, with the task of writing the draft, as basically they were the new hotshot writers in the industry. The two writers didn't actually know too much about the source material, but eventually picked up a few games and an SNES gamepad for the first time and started learning about the franchise. And after hours of playing and hard work, eventually all this progress was formed into what we know by fans as the infamous fantasy draft. Let's get into this fantasy draft and figure out what this original version of the film was. This draft starts out like the actual movie, with a shadowy figure dropping off a baby at a church with a ruby locket being lost in the sewer. Fast forward a few years, the Mario brothers are in Brooklyn. We see that Mario is a short, angry man worried about debt, and his business partner, Luigi, is a tall Italian man who has a heart. Mario is in debt with Big Eddie, and Luigi this time around is in love with a person called Hilda, who is pretty much Daisy from the movie. In the story, Luigi can't seem to profess his love for her. Also, Luigi keeps having dreams where Hilda is kidnapped by a shadowy figure and drops a ruby locket, setting up for future events, I'm sure. The brothers have their differences for sure in the script, with Mario needing money and struggling to keep up with his business, while Luigi is caught giving money to the homeless, which Mario gets mad at him for. Soon though, the brothers go to a plumbing job at a church, where Luigi does for free, and Mario gets mad at the idea of that. They eventually screw up the church's pipe system, but Luigi finds the ruby locket from his dream. Wow, what a coincidence. After this, Mario wants to pawn it, but Luigi believes it means something. After this, Mario tries to pawn it, but is duped by Luigi. Oops. Realizing he'd been duped, Big Eddie runs after Mario. Shortly after this, a shadowy figure eventually goes up to Hildy and tells her that he basically knows where her lost parents are, as if this was a part of the script that basically was established that she actually didn't know who her parents were. She sadly falls for it, but Luigi's suspicious of the man. And finally, the figure kidnaps Hildy and runs into a weird diner in the alley and eventually into a pipe. Eventually, Mario and Luigi link up and decide to follow and try to chase after the man and Hildy, and eventually run into the weird diner as well. The brothers fight over the ruby locket and eventually get into the same pipe that Hildy was in and eventually land in the Mushroom Kingdom. They are greeted by evil piranha plants. They find the plants harassing a small toad-like creature named Toad, like from the game. The brothers eventually help the creature get away from the evil plants, only if they help them get home, which Mario wants to go home while Luigi actually wants to save Hildy initially. To break up the argument, soon a giant airship with propellers with a figure that stole Hildy soon shows up. Eventually though, the figure reveals himself to be Koopa, the villain of our story. He captures the brothers and takes Hildy, and eventually as the Mario brothers are about to get executed, eventually one of them shows the locket to a Zemlin, basically humans who are enslaved to Koopa's regime. This shocks the Zemlin and eventually convinces him to release the brothers, as they actually believe the brothers are warriors, a part of some ancient prophecy that will eventually free them from Koopa's regime. After this, the Zemlin, Toad, and the brothers are taken into town to meet a grumpy wizard who basically scolds the brothers who don't think they're actually the magical warriors in the prophecy. Regardless though, he's eventually convinced and Luigi really wants to save Hildy, so he eventually sends the duo on a quest to basically go to the pit of no return to get his wand and eventually they can save Hildy. And in return he basically promises great wealth and also gives the duo a map as well. Meanwhile, Toad speaks with a bar boy in private and eventually a messenger turtle flies out and eventually lands with Koopa, who soon knows that the brothers are still alive, in which he sends the Hammer brothers to handle the issue once and for all. Now, Koopa's goal in the story is he basically wants the Crown of Invincibility that will basically give him unlimited power to basically run the kingdom, but he can only get it if he marries Hildy, who in turn must also love Koopa in her heart. Obviously a pretty bigger challenge than initially started. At first, Koopa tries to be nice, but is obviously rejected. Then he tries a love spell where Hildy must eat a box of chocolates, and then she will be under a love spell and marry Koopa. Hildy eventually receives the chocolates and wonders if she will eat them, but we eventually cut back to the journey progressing with Mario and Luigi. Mario finds a small dinosaur called Junior in the script, but basically is Yoshi from the game. The infant imprints on Mario and actually loves him, but eventually Mario and the duo eventually leave it. Eventually the brothers and Toad, who was kind of forced to come by the wizard, eventually reach the pit. They go in, and after facing traps, thwomps, they reach the end and Mario gets the wizard's wand, and also some jewels. Toad gets a red leaf and Luigi gets some powder from the pit. The issue is that the wizard Walton, basically in the story, told them that they can only get one item each. If they try to get more, there will be consequences. And soon a ghost tries to take Mario and eventually takes the jewel, as Mario tried to take 2 items from the pit. After this, the 3 get out the pit and are actually confronted by Koopa, the Hammer Bros, and also his Koopa and Goomba troupe. Shortly after a brief angry spout of dialogue, Luigi is pushed into the pit, and it's also revealed that Toad would backstab the group by revealing the location of him to Koopa. The troops are about to push Mario into the pit, but eventually, Junior rushes in, knocks over some troops, and drags Mario away from the fight. Mario thanks the young creature, and soon the creature hears a yell of his own kind, and actually goes to its real mother after Mario's permission. Meanwhile, Hildy is progressively becoming more green, more ugly, and slowly finding a love for Koopa, as the love spell is finally working as she's eating more of the chocolate. After this, eventually Toad is also pushed into the pit as he's betrayed by Koopa, and soon Luigi's also falling in the pit as well. Toad gives the red leaf to Luigi, who soon grows to have a tail and a raccoon suit, and saves Toad. Basically this script's version of the Tanuki suit from the game. After landing safely and now the suit is gone, eventually they find their way out, and Toad actually admits that he was the one that ratted out the brothers. Already something that we kind of figured out in the script, but he eventually confronts Luigi about it. They make amends and continue their journey to find Mario and save Hildy. Mario all along tries to get help from the mysterious wizard Walton, but is actually hit randomly by a streak of lightning. Talk about bad luck. Eventually, Mario, and with the ruby locket in hand, reaches what he thinks is Koopa's castle, but it was actually a trick by Koopa's right-hand man, Beetleman. Soon, Mario is saved by Luigi, and what follows is a long chase from the Hammer Bros, which eventually results in them actually getting to the real Koopa castle. Eventually, the duo sneak in using Koopa armor, and after a few slapstick moments involving the brothers performing as Koopa actors for Koopa's stag party with hilarious singing involved, they also eventually find Hildy in the midst of the stag party, who's been completely transformed into a green, hideous wench. Mario kind of describes it as, who got hit by an Avon truck upon the appearance of her.
Damn!
Eventually though, the brothers' disguise doesn't work and the brothers are caught and thrown into an ice prison. With basically the 4 of the ice will actually melt in the morning, and the brothers will fall into a pool of razor-sharp fish. During this time, the brothers have been quarreling throughout the script and been having issues, and eventually, during this time period, they finally sit down to work out some of their issues. Luigi confesses that even though he loved Mario, he wanted to leave Mario a long time ago, but his mom before she died made him promise to never leave him, as she feared that Mario without his brother would make him cold and bitter. Mario, shocked at this revelation, eventually makes up with Luigi and finds new appreciation for him as a brother. Luigi actually gives Mario the Swiss Army knife that the duo were fighting over earlier in the script, and both finally work out their issue. Meanwhile, Hildy finally eats the last chocolate and is completely under the love spell. Eventually after this, the wedding starts, with Koopa apparently mad that nobody really showed up to the wedding with him and Hildy. Toad eventually comes to save the day as he rescues the brothers from the ice prison, just in the nick of time as they almost fall into the pool of razor-sharp fish in the morning. Eventually though, this all makes up for Toad's character and his past bad decisions with the brothers. The group crashes Koopa's wedding, but it is too late. Koopa has the magical crown of invincibility as the swear of oath has already been established with the wedding. Luigi uses the powder he found in the pit to basically reverse the spell on Hildy, turning her back to normal, but also is turned into stone by Koopa. Koopa, now having the crown, eventually attacks the brothers, and after a long chase reaches the river of lava like from the games underneath the castle. Toad takes Luigi and Hildy away, while Mario attempts to fight Koopa alone. Mario tries to use the ruby locket that he got earlier, but inside contacts Walton, who basically tells Mario that the key to defeating Koopa is actually in himself. Mario tries a few things to defeat Koopa, but eventually keeps taunting Koopa, and eventually Koopa in anger keeps growing bigger and bigger. The issue is though that the crown doesn't get any bigger and eventually falls off Koopa's head. Eventually Koopa loses all of his power and falls into the lava, eventually defeating him. After this, the group is actually presented by a celebration for their efforts of saving the Mushroom Kingdom, and actually surprised to everyone, Walton comes back from the dead. He also reveals the fact that he was actually the lost king to the Mushroom Kingdom, and Hildy's father. He gives Toad and the brothers medals, which Mario is fuming at as he expected a big amount of gold and wealth, which Luigi obviously taunts him over. Eventually the brothers go back to Brooklyn, and after some time passed in the script, Mario pays all of his debts off. Luigi marries Hildy, and even later on in the script, Mario finds true love in the form of an old hag from the Mushroom Kingdom, who earlier in the script kissed Mario to find true love. This actually caused her to get rid of the spell that was put on her, and eventually at the end of the story, Mario talks with her in her new appearance and make up. And finally wrapping up the story, the truck the brothers were using earlier for their plumbing business, known as the Mario Brothers on the truck, is now rebranded to the Super Mario Brothers, officially ending the story. So that was the fantasy draft. Overall, the story in my opinion really works, and it feels like the game's truly brought back to life inside of a movie. The script has so many cool Mario references, a cool relationship dynamic with the brothers, and also all of that sorcery and medieval background that would actually appeal to kids and similar to the game. One of the writers of the script, Genuine, said, "So right away we knew that the best way to do this is to essentially have a journey into this world, not unlike the Wizard of Oz." And he's absolutely right. This approach really works, as Mario to the audience is a fish out of water for this massive world. Once this draft of the story was submitted, the feedback was pretty positive. Nintendo really liked the script, and producers liked it at first as well, but they basically wanted to revise some of the themes and deepen some of the character relationships and maybe increase some of the tone as well. I mean, they were happy that it was at least opposite of their first script, Drain Man. Now that the film actually had a solid script, the producers began looking for a director to helm the film, and also possible actors as well. They eventually hired Greg Beeman to be the director of the film, whose only credits at the time was the 1988 comedy License to Drive. It was a decent $8 million film about wacky teenage hijinks and a lot of driving. Greg Beeman at the time seemed like a good choice for a Mario Brothers movie, as generally his films are more lighthearted in tone and embrace an occasional style of fantasy. Beeman was hired in 1992. He had just wrapped his second film, Mom and Dad Saved the World, which is basically also a fantasy-like film that basically fit the fantasy's draft tone. Soon, pre-production for the film started to ramp up. Beeman hired Tony Gardner, who he had worked with on Mom and Dad Saved the World, to basically do the practical effects for the film. He created many models and artwork for the film, and also apparently created a working animatronic piranha plant, but sadly no pictures of it have surfaced online, but many people have claimed to have seen it. Yotarian Studios was hired to do the concept art for many of the characters and creatures that would appear in the film, which included Toad from the movie, based on the mushrooms that we actually saw in Mom and Dad Saved the World as a basis. It's a pretty interesting style they were going on with the artwork here, as it's much more closer to the games, but also having that realistic fantasy-like style. They created artwork for Toadanians, Goombas, Koopa Troopers, Bob-ombs, really cool looking thwomps, piranha plants, those messenger turtles, and various fish including the ones from the ice prison, and also Junior, which looks really awesome. They also included artwork for King Koopa, who was actually modeled after Arnold Schwarzenegger, who at the time was in talks to play the role, but later turned it down. Also other practical effects were made for the film, like models for what the film's Mushroom Kingdom looked like that basically look very similar to the games, featuring lush wildlife, a Wizard of Oz inspired pathway, and hey, those cool pipes from the game. We can also see Luigi and Mario in one of the photos with a more Super Show inspired look in this version as well. Overall, it all looks pretty great. There was also another model made that was basically going to be the concept for Koopa's castle, and specifically for a part where Hildy was going to be kept captive in the castle. I kind of love the strange and weird design of it all. It looks very much a fantasy style like film, but with some really interesting and modern sensibilities. For actors that were considered for the roles, I already mentioned that Arnold Schwarzenegger was definitely considered for Koopa. Also, Danny DeVito was also considered for Mario, which he would eventually decline as well. Tom Hanks as Mario was also suggested, but the producers got cold feet on that idea as well. Overall, I think that most of the artwork looks really interesting and cool, but at the same time there are some creepy and mixed bag moments as well. But overall, like I said, it looks pretty cool and shows a much more faithful and accurate version to a live action Mario film. Kind of like a Dark Crystal inspired tone for a Mario film, but soon all this work would go to waste, as Beeman's second film, Mom and Dad Saved the World, would soon change things for the status of this film. Mom and Dad Save the World would come out in 1992 and would be a huge box office bomb with a budget of $14 million and only making a small measly $1 million. And the reception was less than positive for the film, and soon all this chaos would eventually spell doom for the pre-production of Beeman's Mario film, with the film being one of the primary reasons the director was fired from the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Apparently, before the release of Mom and Dad Save the World, the producers saw a rough cut of the film and absolutely hated it, and eventually fired Greg Beeman from the film itself. Ouch. Other reasons why Greg Beeman was let go of the project were apparently distributors would not back the film with a newbie director like Beeman, and producers eventually fired him as one of the reasons for that as well. Even one of the producers, Jaffe, claimed that Beeman didn't have the stretch for it. While Beeman asserted that he was let go of the film due to creative differences for the most part, everything indicated that Beeman's version of the film was heading toward a more kid-friendly / fantasy approach to the project, which went against what the producers wanted from the very beginning. If you don't remember, in the very beginning they wanted a Mario movie with edge, and also to attract a larger audience. So already, just like that, $1 million was spent on the fantasy draft and an estimated $10 million already went to the effects, were basically all going to waste, as Beeman left the film, and eventually, this version of Super Mario Bros. Died with a quiet death. Shortly after this, as we all know, the producers wanted a more darker direction for the film, and soon more screenwriters were brought in to darken the mood and tone, and also do other ideas with the concept, like the idea of Dino Hannon eventually coming to light later on. The producers continued looking for directors. The producers asked many, including Hale Ramis, who declined it, later remarking it was the smartest decision of his career. Yikes. Eventually, though, they found Rocky Jankel and Ann Jankel as the directors for the film and were actually hired on. And obviously, this all led to the final film in 1993 that we all got. And the story of that film is also equally as fascinating and truly insane as well. So that was the lost and cancelled version of the Super Mario Bros. Movie that we could have got. And who knows, if this film comes out, maybe it would have been super successful and actually not started the video game curse that still plagues today. That all started from the Mario Bros. Movie from 1993. But at the same time, the producers for this film were always looking for a Mario story with much more edge and broader appeal. So who knows, if Beeman in this version would have persisted, Beeman could have still been very much fired, or this version could have very much been similar to the version we got today. It's all a big what if. But still, this version of the film is still very cool to talk about. It's a very cool what could have been. In my opinion, would have been much more appealing to watch than the final film as well. I love so many elements in this draft of the story. I love so many of the Mario game references, many of the characters, the simple kid-friendly tone, a lot of the designs and concepts. Even though I do think that some retooling and some changes to the script should have been done, I think overall this could have been potentially a great film. But sadly, as we all know, that's just not gonna happen. But hey, at least we did get a decent Mario Bros. Movie from Illumination out of all people, which was actually surprisingly pretty good, and also weirdly shares many elements from the fantasy draft as well. Regardless though, that was the story of the lost and cancelled 90s version of the Super Mario Bros. Movie that we could have gotten. Hopefully y'all liked the video. I'm gonna finally eat some mushrooms and go into this mysterious pipe in this diner as well. Whew. Peace y'all.